Picking Michael Penix was actually pretty smart, and Kirk Cousins just needs to shut up and play.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Yes, I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download the Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. So, guys, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, right? Still going strong on this illustrious podcast where some people call me Sirius Black, some people call me Mr. Drew, and a bunch of other AKAs. And, you know, there's some people call me Mr. AKA. I don't know. But, appreciate everyone that is a everydayer of this illustrious podcast that makes it their first listen or first watch of the day. And if you want to become an everydayer, so you can call me Mr. AKA or the iron that sharpens the iron or the Jolly Green Giant or whatever it is. You know, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So without further ado, let's get into the topic of the day, which continues to be Michael Penix. Yeah, it's all Michael Penix. Then later in the week, we'll talk about the Falcon schedule, right? But, you know, all week long, we're talking Michael Penix. And today we're talking with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Matt is going to share why Michael Penix was actually a good pick and why Michael Penix is actually better than you think. And we'll get into that right now on today's Locked On Falcons. Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast with another illustrious guest. He is Matt Waldman, making his triumphant return to the podcast. He does the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, which is probably the most comprehensive combination of draft and fantasy projections for the upcoming NFL season coming off of the heels of the draft. And of course, Matt, big fan of Michael Penix. Also, we had him on last year talking about Desmond Ridder and some of the issues that he had with Desmond Ridder. And, you know, that gives you a little bit more clout, I guess, with the Falcon fans, Matt, because the Desmond Ridder experience did not quite go the way it did. Not to say that you were rooting against it, but no. You had your doubts. It didn't go that way. But my friend, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And, to me, it's an exciting time, though I kind of feel like I'm a little bit on an island, with Penix, but that's okay. Yeah. That's the fun part about all this.
That's fine. Well, we're going to get into that island because I've been asking pretty much all my guests for like the last week and a half, sort of, what was your reaction to the pick? But instead, I want to ask you about the backlash against the pick. And I've seen you write in your post-draft Rookie Scouting Portfolio and elsewhere, sort of talking about pushing back against the narrative that the Penix pick was a bad pick. So I'll just give you the floor to sort of share what your thoughts are on that.
For sure. And this is kind of more of a buckle in moment for a lot of folks, but because my first reaction was like, okay, this is a really good pick. And then when I was a little surprised to see the vitriol that was kind of put out there with him. And, I understand it from the fans' point of view because you're thinking, we want to win now and we should have had another pick. And then you had Kirk Cousins who literally said he didn't know and that he was disappointed and he would have hoped the team would want them to win. We're going to get to Cousins in a second here on this one, okay? But let's just start with what the Falcons were thinking, or some of the Falcons in the organization were thinking. And I think they were thinking well, because if most scouts understand, and coaches too, that it's better to pick a quarterback when you already have a quarterback, because one of the biggest reasons why there's a 33% success rate for first round quarterbacks isn't because whether they're talented or not. It's because they may need more time to like sit and watch and learn with a quality quarterback in front of them to teach them the ins and outs of what it's like to prepare behind the scenes. Or if you start to screw up because they put you on the field and things are going too fast for you, that it's good to actually put you on the bench, say, look, you're not seeing the field well. And instead of forcing you to try and play through that where you overthink everything because That's what happens with quarterbacking. It's integrating all these different skill sets into trying to create good solutions. And you're playing with other people. And if they don't know their assignments well, if they're young receivers or the offensive line misses assignments, now you're trying to compensate for other people's jobs as a quarterback while you're also trying to learn the system, the complexities of defenses and the way that they disguise them in the NFL, the speed of the game. Oh, yeah. And you're young. You just got a lot of money. Your family, your family may have moved with you. You've moved to a new town. You're trying to figure out where to go, where to live, who to trust, who not to trust, what's going on in your, much less preparing on a regular basis and learning how to work at a level that's beyond what you did in college. That takes a lot of bandwidth. So you're going to play slower oftentimes when that happens. And the best quarterbacks we've seen, most of them get some intermittent playing time and sitting a little bit. From Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, whether it's intentional or not, to Brett Favre, Steve Young, Drew Brees. Drew Brees, what I just described about what coaches could do with a player, that's exactly what Marty Schottenheimer did with Drew Brees. And he said, that's what made me the quarterback I am, not Sean Payton. It was Marty Schottenheimer going, you're not seeing it well. You're still our guy. Don't worry, but we're putting Flutie in or whoever they had at the time. And so that you can kind of watch what good decision-making looks like in how we want you to manage the game. And if we get close in this game, you're coming back in. So you take Penix and you give to me, and we'll get into why I think Penix is a good quarterback and really one of the better quarterbacks in this class. And you're giving him extra time to get up to speed on all of that behind a veteran who also, when he got drafted behind a first overall pick or an early pick in Robert Griffin in the first round as a hedge. And he didn't play until he was 27, or actually he didn't play as an every week starter, and nobody knew whether he would be any good, at least until he was 27. And I remember what it was like watching him before then. And most people thought he was the butt of jokes. So he got that ramp up time of intermittent starting as well. So you take him in the first round, Michael Penix, because there were, James Palmer confirmed, there were 3 to 4 other teams that tried to trade up to get him. And if you look at next year, not about how good the quarterback class is or not, which it's not purportedly a very good one, but those projections are unreliable because most of those people haven't watched enough tape yet to see. But it's the demand for the position next year. There's up to 12 teams next year that may need a quarterback. So now you're looking at what's arguably a dwindling supply next year of rookie quarterbacks for an increased demand. If you're going to pick a quarterback and you're going to give them a chance to learn, this is the time to do it. So people might say, well, why not trade back? Well, if you trade back and there's 3 to 4 other teams waiting to see how far you trade back, they know now where they need to trade up to get to where they go. They get to make the second move after you made your first move. So you're at a disadvantage there, and you might not get who you wanted. And it sounds like they knew who they wanted for a while. And then the final thing really that we look at here in terms of all that is, what about the remaining piece? Well, Kirk Cousins, in the same breath that he was giving his unfiltered reaction about this, was talking about how if today I can run fast in a straight line, I hopefully will be healthy when we're ready for camp. But if I had to break a pocket right now and get outside a pocket, I couldn't really do it. Okay, now we all anticipate for the amount of money they paid Kirk Cousins that they did their due diligence, hopefully, to know that he will be ready. Think that he'll be ready by then. But my co-host Brandon Angela, who is an athletic trainer to pros, a former football player himself, he said the one thing that Falcons fans should probably look out for with Kirk Cousins is to see how the Achilles injury that he has will impact his throwing stance, because the foot that it's on will require a fair bit of torque. And to be a guy who's going to be 36 in August coming off this injury, there is an elevated concern that he's not going to be able to throw the ball with the range of motion and comfort and drive and force because of that injury. He'll be healthy like Tony Pollard was healthy enough to get on a field, but then telling us 6 months later that, well, I wasn't really 100% until late in the season, because that's how NFL players do. They're expected, they're not the peak version of that player. So there's a real concern he might not be the peak version. And if we look at last year, you had Pro Bowl caliber talents at tight end, receiver, running back, good depth at running back, a good enough offensive line, and some up and comers on defense. If you had had a quarterback who could like read the field and didn't force Arthur Smith to have static routes that just break back and terminate, and instead allow them to break across multiple zones, but he couldn't do that because he didn't have a quarterback who could actually read the field well enough to make strong decisions. And we talked about his red light, green light stuff last year and how he couldn't tell the difference between the two. Arthur Smith, while he was irascible to the media for sure, he kind of had to fall on his sword because he knew he didn't have a quarterback who could read the field, and he had to create an offense that limited a lot of these weapons because the quarterback couldn't do what he needed to do. So you tell me, what's more important, another defensive tackle for a quarterback who might not be able to throw a ball accurately and is 36 and could have relapses and compensatory injuries, or another wide receiver, or maybe a quarterback who's good enough right now that if you had to put him in the game, that he would be a notch better, at least, than what you had last year. And to me, that's Michael Penix. And when I look at the scenario, I know people don't like it, but to me, if you're developing and also you're looking at what's happening next year, you're looking at the caliber of the player and the situation with the player you've got, who probably, I'm not a big believer in shut up and play your sport, but he's the guy. I would say that Kirk Cousins, he had a nice image on a little image rehab on Netflix, but he was always seen as a little strange and a little bit of an odd bird by some of his teammates. And, he's a very good quarterback when he's healthy. And that's what Falcons fans want to see. But this is why a 36-year-old quarterback isn't a 54-year-old GM or player personnel manager or owner. And maybe why they didn't tell him ahead of time that they were picking Michael Penix, because maybe he would have gone to the media and unintentionally ruined that out of the fact that he was more worried about himself than he was about his teammates. Even though he wants to be a leader, he may not know how to always go about doing that outside of what's between the lines.
Okay. Well, Matt, that was gold right there. To shut up and dribble for Kirk Cousins. The fact that he can't keep his mouth shut. The Falcons are in a tampering investigation because Kirk Cousins didn't keep his mouth shut. But I do want to talk with you about why you like Michael Penix. Sure. But I really wanted to give you the floor to go into that because I really appreciate that. But we're always here to entertain here on the Locked On Podcast. We will get into why you're so high on Michael Penix, why you had him the second best quarterback in this draft class behind Caleb Williams, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, it is the time of year where you're hanging out with your friends, and you need them more now than ever because with Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments, right? You need your friends so that you can work together and build up each other's boards. And the more that you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, such as unique stickers that you can trade with a friend, the complete cool new albums. You have cool new playing pieces, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings and heist their vaults. And, of course, I love heisting a vault. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. They try to include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench, join your friends, and download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So let's get into it. You had a very high opinion of Michael Penix. I know he's a player that you've been watching going back to his days at Indiana. I've been recently trying to watch some of his old film from IU back in the day to sort of get a more well-rounded picture of him as a prospect rather than just focusing on this obviously very productive senior season, or super senior season, I guess you could say now with a lot of these COVID guys. But just, go into what stood out to you on film as you watch Michael Penix over the years.
Yeah, and first, as someone who evaluates quarterbacks, I'll let people know that the RSP is one of the two most purchased publications by NFL personnel evaluators who come to schools and visit with recruiters, like, say, Alex Brown, who is the head of recruiting at SMU and now at Ole Miss. And he meets with these guys regularly and sees what they use to cross-check the work that they do. And I contribute scouting reports to Will Hewlett, who is a quarterback coach, who is, his clients include Brock Purdy pre-draft, Anthony Richardson, and Caleb Williams. And he and Tom Gormley, who's a biomechanics guy, they were both featured on ESPN with Stephania Bell this year about what they do. They read my reports to look at it as a method to, like, kind of prepare themselves and to talk with quarterbacks about what they see and kind of pull up plays to see what they're looking at. So I just share that to say, I wasn't a huge fan of Desmond Ridder or Zach Wilson or Drew Lock, but I love guys like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and folks like that. And I share that because, I think it's important to give, I'm going to get guys wrong. I'm always going to get guys wrong because you just don't know how they work, or there's certain blind spots you just may not see. But when I watch Michael Penix, I'm scouting players not based on results, but based on the process. What are the things they do technically, intellectually, physically, and to really put themselves and put their teammates in position to make positive plays. Whether that positive play happens or not, did they do it? So I chart games and look for what's pinpoint accurate and generally accurate. And I do that based on the coverage. Sometimes there's going to be throws that I chart as pinpoint accurate where he threw it where a receiver had to make a very athletic play that you wouldn't say that's pinpoint, but based on the coverage and the position of the defenders, that's the only way that ball was going to get in there. The only opportunity he gets. So when I look at Penix with all of that, even back to Indiana, he was more accurate than I think a lot of people chart when they don't look at it in that fashion. They use statistical accuracy sometimes as a charting device, and that doesn't provide enough context. And when you look contextually at him in the middle of the field and the deep, in like the intermediate and vertical ranges of like, 15 to 30, to maybe about 42 yards, there's some areas that he can get a little bit better, but he's not far away from being where he needs to be. The vertical ranges are very good. The boundary ranges are good. And short ranges are good too. But you also see that, more importantly, he doesn't put the ball in harm's way, especially when you go back to Indiana and watch how pressure literally wore him like a second layer of skin. And he wasn't throwing the ball into harm's way. He was throwing the ball away. He was putting it only where receivers could make the play. That's maturity. And especially after you've gotten hurt as often as he had. And people get concerned about the injuries, but there's a certain quarterback out in LA right now who's like playing to a pretty late age for a quarterback, who I remember people saying early in his career coming out of Athens that, that after he was in Detroit for a number of years and had 2 ACL tears, and a couple of shoulder issues. Oh, and he broke his back on top of all of that. He's never going to be anything really all that good, just a good athletic phenom. And Matthew Stafford's won a Super Bowl. So, some of these things we can't really overall predict, but Penix has been reasonably healthy for the past few years. And while he took a pounding there and he had to, the tape's hard to watch if you're looking at a results-oriented standpoint. He graded out well accuracy-wise, moving in the pocket, knowing how to make certain decisions in the conceptual situations of the black zone, the red zone, the green zone, game situations, and placement of the football. And if you don't get worse after you get pounded like that, and you're only getting better, that's a great sign, because most quarterbacks regress when they're playing in bad environments. That usually drags players down. Look at the difference between Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. They were graded similar for me, but just like any quarterback is like a stage performance position where you're playing with an ensemble of people. If everyone else is playing really well and they're creating scenarios where you don't have to do anything but react and think for yourself, and you've worked on those things, you level up faster because you keep getting these positive reinforcement type of scenarios and everything's as expected. If you start off early and all these things are questionable and you don't know whether you can rely on the things that are baseline for you to do your job, you regress. So the fact that Michael Penix got better and better every year, and he was in bad environments until 2 years ago, that really speaks volumes about him. Now, Jared Goff is a good example of a player I had rated highly, and he started off at Cal. I think they won one game his first year, and he got hammered all the time, and he was good in the pocket. But you hear this narrative about Sean McVay, and you look back and realize that Sean McVay got brought in, and they had already invested this early first-round pick in Goff, and they basically said to him, fix Goff. So he micromanaged the heck out of Goff and changed the offense and made it simple, and so that he could work with Goff, because the condition of his employment was to make Goff work. And then when McVay was stubborn about changing his schemes, and the Bill Belichick's ran all over him because he wouldn't tweak his schemes, he scapegoated Goff. And on top of it, he wouldn't let Goff learn more. He was just always in Goff's ear because he had it in his mind that Goff was a certain player. And so that when Goff would be blitzed to oblivion and he looked like a deer in headlights, that's because he's trying to listen to his coach in his ear the whole time rather than play football. And when the Lions got him, they were like, we threw everything we had at him. We just decided, whatever, we made this trade. We're going to be bad. Let's throw everything at him. And if he can't do what we expect, we're getting another quarterback anyway. And we were like, much to our surprise, Jared Goff was actually very good at this stuff. And he just hadn't had a chance, And so when you look at a guy like Penix, people are going to look at like the running that they said that he doesn't really do well, but he's telling everybody, just wait, and you look at the workouts, you see the pocket movement. To me, even though in Indiana it was tough, you watch him in Washington, he climbs a pocket. Most quarterbacks at this level, at where he's entering, many of them, their first reaction is to try and spin out or flush the pocket rather than climb. And if you can climb at where you can like climb at a high speed, stick the landing and be in control to throw an accurate ball and do it in the middle of the field while you're manipulating, you're in Anthony Richardson territory, very good pocket mover. You're Lamar Jackson territory, good pocket mover. He's got that ability to his game. So for me, I look at this guy, and compared to everybody else in this class, who Jaden Daniels, if you ask me, has tragic comic timing with his second and third reads, where he's just misses the guy when he should know that if he waited one more beat, it's there, and he had ample opportunity to do so. Or Drake May, who has a host of issues. I mean, like drifting from the pocket, not good contextual accuracy at all, footwork issues with his release, red zone and black zone issues where he tries to play hero ball, misses pre-snap, post-snap opportunities very early that are very obvious. I look at players like that, and they're all have capabilities to be starters, but they're all in this range where you go, those guys could really use some time. Like they would ideally could use a Jordan Love plan, a guy who was not ready to start at all. And even if they gave him half the Jordan Love plan, it would probably they'd have a better chance of having all that stuff solidified. Michael Penix, to me, there are only two quarterbacks in this class that I felt like, okay, if they had to start this year, they could probably survive it and then continue to grow. One was Caleb Williams, and he's far and away the best quarterback, if you ask me, in this class. And the other one was Michael Penix, who was in a tier of his own above the rest of the other four that everyone gets excited about and have rated above him. So I think the Falcons, honestly, this is going to turn into being a great pick. And the same people who were booing Patrick Mahomes as Kansas City Chiefs fans and saying things on social media are going to be happily eating their words.
Well, I want to get more into this notion of Penix sitting, right? You're talking about him being a guy that could be ready to play, and sort of what do you think sitting is going to, how will that potentially benefit him? And we'll do that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more, including upcoming NFL season props. Right? You can bet on the Falcons over under wins or their Super Bowl odds. They, of course, have player specials, and ones that include Kirk Cousins. How many yards is Kirk going to have this year? Over 4,000, 4,500? How many touchdowns? 30, 35, 40, more? Right? You can find it all at FanDuel. Just go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. As you mentioned, Matt, you think Penix is ready to go right now. You think because of some of the potential issues with Kirk Cousins coming off of his Achilles, he sort of is set up well to be sort of the Falcons' emergency option if they need to at that quarterback position, should they need another option other than Kirk Cousins. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the idea of quarterbacks? You've already sort of touched upon it, that quarterbacks can benefit from this, but specifically for a player like Michael Penix, what do you think are some of the things that he could benefit from sitting? Like, for me personally, my biggest concern watching the film Michael Penix is I think his footwork is a little wonky and it leads to some inaccurate throws from time to time. I think if you can just kind of clean that up a little bit more, having gone back and watched more of his film in Indiana, I thought his footwork was a little cleaner at that point. And I, for whatever reason, just I think simply because he just got to a level and the receivers around him got to a level where he didn't need to be sort of super precise on some of those things. But I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the things that you think, should he potentially sit for 2 years behind Kirk Cousins? What are some of the things that, he could work on that could be significantly better 2 years from now when he does get that opportunity to play?
No, it's an important question. And I think that ideally most quarterbacks should sit, and I would say he'd fit in the most as part of that category of most too. He just happens to be on that borderline where I like him enough that I think he could survive starting if he had to and still and grow into it. But when you look at what could help with him, certainly footwork is great. To me, footwork is really more of a symptom of what the eyes see and what they don't see. And when you see the footwork get a little sloppy, oftentimes it's because they aren't sure about what they're seeing at that moment unfolding, whether they were anticipating a blitz and it turned into a drop, or whether it was a drop and it turned into a blitz, or they were expecting man-to-man and they got zone. Certain times you're going to see defenses that disguise things well, and more so in the NFL. So what you want for one thing that's going to help Michael Penix right away is that him being able to sit is going to allow him to really study the types of defenses that are played and the types of disguises that are done, and be in that quarterback room as Kirk Cousins and Taylor Heineke talk about. This is a disguise, because you could be good in the meeting room about identifying stuff and be horrible at it on the field, and that's something that people also forget too. So I think Penix is very good on the field with a lot of stuff, or works his way through it. But getting the chance to at least have Kirk Cousins identify, theoretically, this is what's going on. Quarterback coach, theoretically, this is what we want to do within our scheme. And have time and reps away from the playing field where you're practicing this stuff, whether it's part of a scout team or whether it's part of the twos, and you're working on those reps while you're also just working on cleaning up your fundamentals, whether your quarterback coach that you have privately is working on, let's shorten your drops. Let's make your drops quicker. Let's focus on, the step when it hits that back foot, and you can work on developing all these things, because the Falcons quarterback coaches aren't doing any of that. That's not their job really in the NFL these days. Their job is to convert what the game plan and scheme is to helping them with little tweaks here and there to help with the scheme, but not their overall play. Help them, so for him, part of it is getting into a work routine so he can really solidify the offense, and that it's second nature. He's not trying to remember the play call while he's on the field like most of these guys are, because they're going to tell everybody in the media that they got it down, but that's BS. Their head's swimming. And they'll tell you that 3 years from now when they've made a Pro Bowl and it's safe, but they're not going to tell you that. Just like that, they don't tell anybody that they're really hurt unless they're so hurt that they can't make it off a field or they don't know where they are, unfortunately. But that's the competitive gameness that people have. And there's a lot of dollars involved and opportunity involved. So it's understandable they're going to put themselves under that pressure. So you reduce the bandwidth of your quarterback. Now he can focus on how to prepare, what to work on, and how to work on it. Get his day straight. Be in the huddle and watch what's going on and watch another quarterback play good situational football. Or if they don't play good situational football, have a quarterback coach say, when Kurt thought that he was Brett Favre over there and tried to arm that ball that you could probably do, but he did it on 3rd and 17 like he's done throughout most of his career. I'm just parenthetically putting all that there because I'd like to knock Kirk Cousins down a peg for a moment for some of his behavior, because he used to think he was Brett Favre, on 3rd and 12 and had Brett Favre's arm. He's like the little chicken hawk in the Warner Brothers cartoons. He thought he was the big bird, and then and it didn't really work out. He's gotten better at that, and he's become a much wiser quarterback. But quarterbacks have that hubris. So if Kirk Cousins make that occasional mistake, or if Taylor Heineke's in there and he makes that mistake, the coach can say, don't do that. Don't do what they did. See what they did up to this point? That's what we want you to do. I know you've got a better arm than those two guys, but don't do that because we need this. And they're getting told so much early on, and they're trying to learn so many things. And then they're 22, 23, 24, and they're Atlanta, new town for them, maybe lots of money, teammates want them to go out. They're trying to figure out where to go, what to do. You've been through, everyone here who's even twice their age has had a busy day in a new place. And think about how wiped you are just doing like innocuous things because you don't know where you are. Everything's new. Everything's overly stimulating. And you're wiped out because you're learning all of that. Oh, yeah. And by the way, you still got a job to do. And it's one of the most demanding on earth, in at least on the world of sports. So the fact that he'll have a year or two to gain a routine, get incrementally better while he's not being expected to play. And if he does have to play some, there is going to be a termination point where they're probably going to put him on the bench unless Cousins just has an injury where he never comes back, and I doubt that that's going to be the case. But for Penix, he's in a great environment. And so what if he has to wait till he's 27 or 28? Steve Young was 31, and Steve Young, we'll just say that those uniforms in Tampa were creamsicles, creamsicle on a stick. He didn't look like a tasty creamsicle on a stick when he was playing at that time. He had to sit behind Joe Montana for a good 4 or 5 years, and he said he relearned his game, and he mentioned that. So this is a blessing in disguise.
There you go. Well, Matt, I appreciate your insight into this conversation. A different perspective, but I think a more than fair perspective, and we'll see what Michael Penix will do in Atlanta. And I'm sure I'll probably have you back on at some point this summer. So, Matt, I definitely appreciate you coming on. Go ahead, plug the rookie scouting portfolio as well as some of the other work that you're working on.
Sure. It's 19th year of publication. You can get it at mattwaldman.com for $21.95. It is an 1,183-page document devoted to quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. The most in-depth scouting reports you will probably see that include charting and an outline of my process that I use and why the people that I talked about early in this show use the RSP. You also get a post-draft along with it that just came out Saturday. And that provides you fantasy rankings that are tiered and give you kind of ADP analysis, average draft position. And I give you a sweet spot between my rankings. So when I say Michael Penix is my number 2 quarterback, like I said, Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson were my number 1 quarterbacks in those classes. I didn't say you should just draft them at this spot where I have them ranked. I show you how long you can wait until you take this guy and still get other good talent along with it. So all that's for $21.95 at mattwaldman.com. And of course, at footballguys.com, you can find me there. I've been there since 2009.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Appreciate Matt Waldman for joining me, giving a slightly different opinion than some of the other ones that you've heard on this podcast and elsewhere over the last, 10 days or so. So appreciate him for that. Go check out the rookie scouting portfolio. I'll link to that in the description below. And tomorrow's episode, I think, will be joined by Locked On Huskies host Roman Tomashoff to talk a little bit more about Michael Penix, as well as other topics coming up with rookie mini camp sort of creeping up on us, as well as the schedule release later in the week. So that is in store for you as your first listen tomorrow. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, or Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL Scouting, if you want to stay up to date on the latest post-draft content, as well as the content for the other 31 NFL teams. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, guys. Your team every